Yo, what's going on, guys? So I thought I might just freestyle this one with no music and basically just talk about this. So I was doing some research on geoengineering and weather modification, just continuously looking into it, and I stumbled across this document that was released back in 2003, specifically February 27th, 2003, and it seems to be released by the CIA. I just thought that this was a very interesting document because it talks about a lot of things in here, specifically about weather modification and controlling the climate, and it just lays it all out. And this was originally written in October 7th, 1965, so this was about 54 years ago. 54 years ago? Anyway, so let's just look at what's being discussed here. For your information, some attachments are provided which show the extent of interest and trends in weather modification research in the United States. For example, federal support for 1967 will be 4 times that for 1963, and President Johnson to the Secretary of Commerce shows us that an expanding program has White House backing. Yeah. So I've read through most of it, and this is basically same thing. So this is the amount of money that was put into this program in millions. So you can see for the different, features, you got agriculture, defense, the army, and all that. The grand total was about 10.97 million. And you got to keep in mind, this was 1965 to 67. So that's a good amount of money for back then. So this is President Lyndon B. Johnson. So you can see clearly they're talking about weather. Now, this right here, memorandum for the president, this was written, and it is signed by him too. This was written by John T. Connor, who was the Secretary of Commerce at the time, from 1965 to 1967. And he says a lot of very bizarre things in this memorandum. And, well, let's just take a look. The Weather Bureau provided excellent and timely warnings of Hurricane Betsy. These warnings permitted the evacuation of people and the taking of necessary precautions to protect life and property. So basically, he starts this off by talking about Hurricane Betsy, which at the time was one of the worst and most destructive storms in the United States. I mean, here it is right here. Hurricane Betsy was one of the most intense and destructive storms ever to strike the United States. There has been serious loss of life and a destruction and damage of property in the southern Florida and in Louisiana and Mississippi will run into hundreds of millions of dollars. So he goes on here to talk about the toll of Hurricane Betsy, how much money was spent trying to repair the damages, how many people died and all that. And if we continue reading here, an environmental hazards warning plan is being prepared by the Department of Commerce in concert with other federal agencies. When the plan is implemented, the nation will have a comprehensive natural hazards warning system. So it continues onward to talk about how we, as a nation, America, should start programs to be better at detecting weather, which doesn't sound too bad on the surface. But you gotta hear what he continues on and talks about. Weather modification. Here's where it gets very interesting. A vigorous national program to explore the possibilities of weather modification should now be mounted. I intend to have Environmental Science Services Administration take the leading role in this program. It is clear that we must now press forward to improve our ability to detect, track, and predict severe weather hazards. It is equally clear that the time has come for us to move vigorously forward to explore the possibilities of modifying and controlling the weather in beneficial ways. Interesting. I cannot emphasize too strongly the importance of weather modification to the nation at large. If we in the United States were to acquire the ability to modify the weather in a substantial way, to augment precipitation, to blunt the thrust of hurricanes and other severe storms, to suppress hail in crop areas, to cope with lightning discharges in forest areas, to dissipate all types of fog, we would have an achievement of vast significance. We would be able to expand our national economy and to improve the well-being of the American people in ways to a degree that are now inconceivable. The ultimate benefits that weather modification can bring are now unimaginable. Whoa, okay, so that's a lot to unpack right there. Everything he just said in that paragraph alone proves that there is an agenda to control the weather. So for all those people out there talking about, and this isn't even really just completely like talking about chemtrails or anything, because anybody who talks about chemtrails basically is just talking about programs such as what the CIA sets up to control the weather. Everything in this paragraph alone in this declassified document by the Secretary of Commerce in 1965, 54 years ago, they were talking about controlling the weather. So this paragraph alone talks about this agenda. Another thing I thought was interesting is to suppress hail in crop areas. If you haven't read Agenda 21, I recommend you go and you read some of that, because there's a lot that talks about agriculture and how they want to control the farmland, and they don't want people like you and me growing our own food and having our own control of natural resources. They want to control all of it. So if you have not even heard of Agenda 21, you need to look that up, and there should be a PDF version of it available somewhere. I think I have it downloaded actually, but you should definitely go check that out. And there is a growing conviction among scientists that a systematic, scientifically sound, properly conceived program of research and development in weather modification is warranted. First, there have been some successful experiments in the field of weather modification, although the results are far from definitive. Second, there have been a number of technological advances over the past decade that give us a new capability for research. We are beginning to simulate atmospheric phenomena on high-speed electronic computers, which enables us to experiment with the atmosphere under controlled conditions. We are acquiring a deeper understanding of the physical and chemical processes of the atmosphere. So he just continues onward and talks about this. A national program of weather modification research will require additional resources to provide the necessary facilities for the conduct of large-scale field research experiments. So he just continues onward and onward, going for it. The World Weather Watch. If there is to be a significant increase in the ability of our national weather services to issue timely and accurate forecasts of weather hazards such as Hurricane Betsy, to make long-range weather predictions, and to explore the possibility of large-scale climate modification. Let me just repeat that. To make long-range weather predictions and to explore the possibility of large-scale climate modification, we must develop the ability to obtain comprehensive weather data for the entire globe, and must conduct a broad program of research on global weather processes. Climate modification. The first thing that comes to mind is this whole climate change stuff, and just imagine that. Controlling the weather. Imagine controlling the weather and changing the climate to give this illusion that we're all going to die, that we're all putting these crazy amounts of carbon into the atmosphere. So then you can put in a carbon tax. and basically single-handedly screw over the entire population by paying carbon tax. It's almost genius. It's so evil.
Another example is the array of technologies, often referred to collectively as geoengineering, that potentially could help reverse the warming effects of global climate change. One that has gained my personal attention is stratospheric aerosol injection, or SAI, a method of seeding the stratosphere with particles that can help reflect the sun's heat in much the same way that volcanic eruptions do. An SAI program could limit global temperature increases, reducing some risks associated with higher temperatures and providing the world economy additional time to transition from fossil fuels. This process is also relatively inexpensive. The National Research Council estimates that a fully deployed SAI program would cost about $10 billion yearly. As promising as it may be, moving forward on SAI would also raise a number of challenges for our government and for the international community. On the technical side, greenhouse gas emission reductions would still have to accompany SAI to address other climate change effects, such as ocean acidification, because SAI alone would not remove greenhouse gases from the atmosphere. On the geopolitical side, the technology's potential to alter weather patterns and benefit certain regions of the world at the expense of other regions could trigger sharp opposition by some nations. Others might seize on SAI's benefits and back away from their commitment to carbon dioxide reductions. And as with other breakthrough technologies, global norms and standards are lacking to guide the deployment and implementation of SAI and other geoengineering initiatives.
Now this I also thought was very interesting. Listen to this. The movement of the atmosphere knows no national boundaries, and what happens in the atmosphere over one nation affects the atmosphere of other nations. Moreover, no one nation can observe and analyze the atmosphere everywhere in the world, and each nation needs the weather data of other nations to provide proper weather services to its people and to the various segments of its economy. And so the nations of the world cooperate closely in weather matters. One thing I find ironic about that is he's talking about how no one controls or owns the atmosphere. No one owns it. But yet these psychopaths are using these programs as if they do own it, just to screw us over, and it's insane. So then, basically, he just continues onward to talk about just how this program was developed. It's insane. The development of the World Weather Watch is important work for the United States and the world at large. It will permit us to broaden our scientific knowledge of the globe's temperature, and it will permit us to provide earlier and better warnings of severe storms. And although there is a lot of things mentioned here, talking about like weather warnings, and do I think that's bad? No, of course not. I don't think it's bad that we can predict when a storm's going to happen. I don't think that's bad at all. But when they lose me is when they talk about how we should be able to control it. Just like it said in that paragraph. All the way up here. I'll have to find it again. Right here. This is where they lose me. They're talking about being able to control precipitation and the thrust of hurricanes. Come on. Humans should not be in control of that. And it's crazy. And here's his signature. His signature's right here. He wrote all this to Johnson, President Johnson. 54 years ago. They were talking about this. They were talking about establishing programs to control the weather. This document was released in 2003. So what was that? 16 years ago? Yeah, 16 years ago this was released. This isn't even a conspiracy. Well, I guess technically it is a conspiracy in the truest definition of that word. It is a plot. There is an agenda. This is all part of this agenda whether it's Agenda 21, Agenda 2030. But this isn't a conspiracy like how most people think of it. This isn't crazy at all. This document released by the CIA 16 years ago, it talks about this in detail. They have been trying to control the weather for at least the past 50 years. Now, the year's 2019 right now. Right now it's 2019. Imagine how far they've gotten. Especially with Agenda 21, which was in the early 90s, and with Agenda 2030, which was like just a few years ago that was released. Imagine how far they've gotten. Imagine how much they've been able to control. It's kind of disappointing to see how people are so quick to just not even want to talk about this because they think it's a crazy conspiracy. Yet there's documents like this right here, released by the CIA, written by the Secretary of Commerce to the President of the United States, talking about controlling the climate and controlling the weather and establishing programs for the sole purpose of doing so. Yeah, so I'll put this link in the description and you guys can check it out. Some interesting stuff. The world is becoming a very strange place. And honestly, the amount of chemtrails that I've been seeing lately have been very suspicious. And not just really recently, just over the past few years. It's clear. There is an agenda, and whoever they are, whether it's the military, CIA, whoever is doing this, running these programs, they have been doing this for a long time, and we are just now catching up and understanding. So, share this video around and let people know. Get the word out. That's about all. So, peace.